Welcome back to Metflex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I'm here with Chris Barakat. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, Rachel.
I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited to dive into all things body recomposition. Um, and yeah, before we get into all of that, do you want to give our listeners just a little bit of background, who you are, what you're up to right now?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Chris Barakat. Essentially, I got involved with everything nutrition and fitness related. I guess officially back in like 2011 when I first started competing in natural bodybuilding. I was just 19 years old. I was always involved with sports and just overall health and exercise and stuff like that. But I really caught the bug in regards to learning as much as possible around 19. And then I pursued my athletic training degree at Stony Brook University for my undergrad. And then I continued to compete in natural bodybuilding, and it kind of snowballed. So rather than pursuing a career in physical therapy, I ended up studying exercise and nutritional sciences for my master's down at the University of Tampa. And yeah, I graduated in 2016. And then I've been teaching at the University of Tampa since 2017 and have been researching there since my time as a graduate student to date. So that's kind of currently what I still do. So I'm a coach, I'm a researcher, a teacher, and an athlete bodybuilder. So that's kind of me in a
Awesome.
nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking off air how we have like super similar, backgrounds both from New York. And then you just said you graduated grad school in 2016.
Yes.
Yeah.
December
So,
of 16.
okay. Yeah, I graduated grad school in 2016 too. So we're literally like
Nice.
exactly the same timeline. Went to undergrad for athletic training,
Very
realized
cool.
that that wasn't for us, and then pursued, you said nutrition, exercise, physiology was your master's?
Yeah, exactly.
Same.
Yeah.
Or we might be like the same person.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Funny. Awesome. All right. So I know, obviously you're an expert in all things body recomposition, and I've, heard you on a bunch of other podcasts and really, took a lot from it and took a lot from what you like your expertise within. Not just, what's really cool is that you're not just, you're a coach and you're working with real life people, but then you're also kind of in the weeds of the research, which is really cool. And I love, bringing both of those together because I think it's important to have, the research and the application side of things.
Absolutely.
So do you want to kind of chat a little bit about, I guess maybe before we dive into body recomposition, maybe you can just give our listeners kind of like I mean, a lot of them have listened to this before and I've had some other guests on, but like what
Yeah.
exactly is body recomposition in like your definition, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I really appreciate that. It's been really exciting for me to basically observe it as a coach, kind of undergo recomposition myself at different phases throughout my career, and then see it in the lab, like where the objective data kind of slapped me in the face. And then I dived down this rabbit hole where it was like all over the research, but nobody was actually talking about it in the evidence-based space. So, yeah, like long story short, I guess, as a coach, I would regularly see recomposition, but never had that pure objective data on it. So body recomposition is when you are gaining lean body mass or building muscle and losing fat mass at the same time. That's the standard definition. That's kind of how we defined it in the paper itself, the research review that we just put out. One other form of recomposition in my eyes is kind of when you're undergoing a very successful lean bulk where you're gaining more muscle than you are fat mass. That's not the traditional kind of definition of recomp, but the way I see it, if you're gaining more lean mass than you are fat mass, your body fat percent is going down, even if you're actually accumulating a little bit of fat mass simultaneously. So that's kind of just like a gray area, but I still think it's kind of worth mentioning because your physique will look better aesthetically if that is the case. So it's still like a recomp in a different manner. And yeah, like I said, I saw this a lot as a coach. And then once I was in the lab as a master's student, I saw in our first training study, 5 out of the 17 subjects underwent this recomposition outcome. And that wasn't what I was expecting at all. It wasn't a dietary study. It was an exercise study. So I was most focused on like, oh, how much muscle are these people going to build? I wasn't even really paying attention to fat mass, but that's just kind of what ended up happening. And then it spiraled out of control from there.
Awesome. Awesome. So
Yeah.
would you say like in your kind of history, in the lab and then also working with clients on a personal basis, like what would be kind of the characteristics of someone who like a client that comes to you or someone that you would see has the best potential, I guess you could say, to recomp
Sure.
versus those that might not?
Sure. So, generally speaking, people would say that recomposition only occurs in novice and untrained individuals, or obese or extremely overweight individuals, or people that are utilizing performance enhancing drugs. Um, those subcategories, those demographics of people definitely have the greatest ability to recomp. But from what the literature shows and from what I've seen as a coach, it actually happens basically across a full spectrum of demographics. Um, I would consider one group is essentially being like sub-optimized trainees. So even if you've been training for 3 to 5 plus years, if there are a couple variables that you're not maximizing, you're kind of leaving potential on the table for recomposition to be an outcome. So a lot of times people fall into this thought process where it's like, all right, you have to be in a calorie deficit, or you have to be in a calorie surplus, or even you have to be at caloric maintenance. But in a lot of these studies, at least the exercise studies, they weren't necessarily controlling their dietary intakes. They were letting the subjects kind of go about their normal dietary practices, and recomposition still occurred because the training stimulus was so effective. So you don't necessarily have to be in one specific phase, and recomposition can actually occur in a calorie surplus, at calorie maintenance, and in a calorie deficit. So it's quite complex, and we don't have all the answers, but there's definitely some evidence, and based on my coaching experience, I can definitely provide some insight as to those who are at a greater potential to see this outcome, and those that are kind of on the other side of the scale where it's less likely for them to see this outcome.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've seen it too, like within like my own experience coaching. It's like crazy how most of the clients that come to me, like they all, when we first start off, like there's always a potential for body recomposition just because it's like there's so many factors that usually aren't dialed in, and not just like
Yes.
even with like nutrition and training, but like everything else, like sleep, stress, all these things. And just to the point that most people aren't like measuring these things objectively, so they're like, oh yeah, my sleep's okay, but like meanwhile they're sleeping like 4 or 5 hours a night for like
Yes.
weeks on end. um but they just don't really realize it, and obviously that catches up to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, is there any like maybe like top I don't know, what's like your top client that comes to you that you're like, okay, you have the potential for sure have a potential for body recomposition, versus someone who um, maybe doesn't really have as much potential and they have to actually go into a surplus or slight surplus
Sure.
or a gaining phase and really focus on that?
Yeah, I actually think most of the clients that come to me are in a position to kind of recomp right off the bat, because they're leaving potential gains on the table. So unless you're an elite athlete that is already very lean, like you don't have that much body fat to start, um, and your variables are in a really good spot, like you're actually paying attention to your nutritional variables, and you're getting good quality sleep, and you're actually training in a manner that has led you to progress from like cycle to cycle, um, you probably can recomp. So what I see a lot is people come to me, let's just say their goal is fat loss. I don't put them in a calorie deficit. I actually generally put them at calorie maintenance, or whatever theoretical maintenance is. And I try to improve their dietary habits, and try to improve their training approach. So, that can be something like, if someone's eating 2 to 3 times per day, I may have them increase their meal frequency, or at least their protein feedings, to 4 to 6 times per day. I start dialing in their nutrient timing, making sure that not only their calories are where they need to be, but their proteins and their fats and carbohydrates are where they need to be. So oftentimes, generally speaking, people are under eating protein. So by increasing their protein intake, dialing in some of those variables, and then totally changing their training, where so many people are going to the gym and they're just doing, 3 sets of 8 to 12 or, 3 sets of 10 to 15 because like their spreadsheet tells them to do that or some program they saw online tells them to do that. Oftentimes they're training at such a low intensity that's like very far away from failure where they're not even really going through those effective reps. So we start increasing their training intensity and they make a lot of progress right off the bat at theoretical maintenance. So
Mm-hmm.
what generally happens is like their body weight may stay the same or relatively the same, fluctuate up a couple pounds, fluctuate down a couple pounds, but something like their waist circumference kind of drops off pretty significantly. So they know that they're losing body fat and building some sort of muscle mass simultaneously. So it's really nice to see that. I think a lot of people are in a position to recomp as long as they improve what they're currently doing from their starting position.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I see a lot of that as well. And then when you kind of talked about nutrient timing and also like kind of how you, I guess, would set up like your protein, carbs, fats, macros. How do you go about that for a typical client in terms of like, obviously if they're under eating protein, increasing that. What's your kind of, I guess, formula,
Sure.
so to say, and so to speak, in terms of like setting up protein, fats, carbs in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely talk through that. So I'm going to give it like, I guess, the Spark Notes or like the Cliff Notes version of it. Essentially, once you determine like what theoretical maintenance is, I typically use something like the Mifflin St. Jean formula. So once I get their theoretical maintenance, the first macronutrient I determine is protein. I personally use 1.2 grams to 1.6 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. So I might look at the client's initial starting photos and I can guesstimate like, okay, this male is around 15, 16%, or this female is around 28% or so. So from there, I calculate their lean body mass and I select a protein target based on that formula, the 1.2 to 1.6 range. Um, the leaner you are, the closer to 1.6 you are. The higher body fat you have, the closer to 1.2 you are. And then the second nutrient I actually determine is fat. I typically have fat between 20% and 35%. Again, the leaner you are, the closer to 20% your total calories are coming from fat. And then the more sedentary or the higher body fat percent you have, the closer to 35% of total calories come from fat. And then from there, I just fill in the rest of your caloric goal with carbohydrate. And then that's your macronutrient setup. And then we can work on some nutrient timing variables. So like how many protein feedings do I want you to have per day? And how are we going to kind of optimize your pre-workout nutrition and post-workout nutrition to make sure that you have the most amount of energy in the gym to actually perform really well? And then what are we doing post-workout to make sure you're recovering? So all of those things kind of come into factor. And there are a lot of things to consider. If a client comes to me and they're only eating 2 or 3 meals per day and their protein's relatively low, I'm not going to jump their protein significantly higher overnight and then ask them to eat 5 or 6 meals per day. It's kind of like you need to see where they're at and take those baby steps to get them where you want them to be and kind of build those habits over time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I love that. And you spoke kind of about nutrient timing and pre and post workout nutrition. And I get this question all the time. And I kind of have my philosophy on, pre and post workout nutrition. I'd love to hear kind of how you set that up
Sure.
in terms of kind of your take on that.
Yeah, for sure. So again, there's so many variables that come into play here. What phase the athlete or client is in is really important, and like what their current body composition is like is really important. So the reason I mention that is because the leaner you are, and if you're in a calorie deficit, the more important these variables become. Whereas if like I work with a lot of physique athletes, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if this is a little bit different than your audience, but like if someone is in their off season or they're in a huge calorie surplus and they're at a higher body fat percent, they have more energy reserves. So like their muscle glycogen is pretty much filled out and their body fat percent is higher, where because they have more energy reserves, pre-workout nutrition isn't as important. but it still is. It just depends like how much energy and how much of a priority do you want to make it. And then for those leaner individuals, it becomes really important because they actually won't be able to perform well if they're not fueling their body properly, because those energy reserves can be depleted. Like if you've been in a calorie deficit for a long period of time, your muscle glycogen is pretty much empty, your body fat levels are lower, so you're not going to perform if you're not eating well. So sorry for the side tangent,
No,
but
no,
I
no.
just,
Love it.
yeah. So like, I just, I like providing a lot of context, because if I just say like, oh, this is how I set up pre-workout nutrition, sometimes it can overwhelm people. And I think it's important to know, like, this is a priority, but your priorities can also kind of vary depending on where you're at. So long story short,
I agree completely. So
yeah, like some pre-workout, like philosophies, I guess, or some things that I'm a big advocate for are utilizing multiple transportable carbs in your pre-workout meal. So all that means is having a starchy carbohydrate source that is going to primarily break down into glucose, and then pairing that with some sort of fruit source that's going to break down into fructose. And what that does is it essentially enables your body to digest, absorb, and assimilate those carbohydrates a little bit more efficiently, because at the cellular level, we have different protein transporters that transport those carbohydrates differently, whether they're a glucose-based carbohydrate or a fructose-based carbohydrate. So really easy analogy I would like to kind of share with your listeners is, picture you had 100 people in one room, and the fire alarm went off, and all these people need to leave that room as quickly as possible. Let's just say all 100 of those people represent 1 gram of glucose. So there's 100 grams of glucose in the room, and all of them need to leave, and they only have one door for them to exit. Okay. It's going to take a little bit longer for all 100 people to kind of evacuate that room. Whereas if I had, 70 people that were glucose and 30 people that were fructose, I kind of just opened up a second door where I'm now allowing 30 people to go out the back door and 70 people to go out the front door. That's kind of what makes the digestive process a little bit more efficient. So you'll have more stable blood glucose levels while you're in the gym, and that would minimize any sort of crash that you may have while you're training. Some people might feel really great the first 30 to 45 minutes of the workout, and then they just kind of crash and they feel like they ran out of gas. And a lot of times that's when you go hypoglycemic, your blood sugar levels crash. And by making sure you're having a really good pre-workout meal, you can, definitely mitigate the risk of that occurring.
Gotcha. And so that would be like in terms of, oh, well, you're probably not finished. So
Oh, no, go
I was
ahead.
going to say like so that's like in terms of carbs, but then we set up like protein, fat. Can we talk a little bit about that? And
Absolutely.
then I did have another thought and then I completely forgot it, but I'll think about it as you talk.
Sure. Yeah. So protein is typically relatively distributed in an even fashion throughout the day. So let's just say I had a really large male bodybuilder at like 250 grams per day. I would just have them have like 5 meals per day at 50 grams of protein, just evenly distributed. If I had, a smaller female at 150 grams per day, they might have 30 grams per meal until they hit that 150. So that's going to depend on each person's size and how much muscle they have. And then regardless, so pre-workout, they're having a very adequate feeding that's going to basically maximize the muscle protein synthetic response, to minimize any risk of like muscle protein breakdown while they're in the gym. And then in regards to fat, generally speaking, it's a relatively low fat meal, but that can vary depending on how far away is their training session. So if someone's training 60 minutes from now, it's definitely going to be lower fat. If someone's training like 2 or 3 hours from now, it can be much higher in fat to slow down the entire digestive process and to make sure that they still kind of have glucose coming from the small intestine into their blood plasma while they're exercising. So that can vary based on like how far out they are. But generally speaking, it's a lower fat meal.
Gotcha. And then in
Yeah.
terms of like if someone's working out maybe like in the morning versus night, do you kind of partition things any differently? Or I guess that would kind of be based off of their entire intake for the day.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, It definitely varies based on what their entire day looks like. Some people that train first thing in the morning before going to work or something, oftentimes they don't have a pre-workout meal, and I actually just have them have a little bit of like intra-workout fuel. So it can be something as simple as like 20 grams from Gatorade, 20 grams of carbohydrate from Gatorade, and maybe like 10 grams of amino acids.
Mhm.
That can come from a whey protein isolate, like an unflavored whey protein isolate, or like 10 grams of EAAs, like essential aminos. So they can do that because a lot of times, again, if this is someone who's like waking up and going to the gym first thing in the morning, you don't really have time to actually digest food. So I would rather you train on a quote unquote empty stomach, have a little bit of fuel coming in intra workout, rather than like feeling full and feeling like you can't push and you can't really perform. Like that's not what I want.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, if someone's training later on in the day, they're going to, if they're trying to optimize all their variables, generally speaking, you have most of your carbohydrates around your workout window. So it can be like pre, intra, and post, or just pre and post. Those would generally be your larger carbohydrate
Mhm.
meals.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I guess kind of speaking a little to this subject, but so this podcast is obviously called Metflex and Chill. Metflex stands for metabolic flexibility. A
Nice.
lot of my listeners are coming from more of like a lower carb background, which is what. So I don't think we talked about this, but I did my master's thesis in looking at a ketogenic diet. In non-elite CrossFit athletes, and that's kind of how I got into like the keto low carb world, like 6 years ago now. We're
Oh,
2020,
wow.
yeah, like 6 years ago. um and so that was super interesting. That's what kind of got me into like the low carb space, and keto started getting popular like a few years later.
Yeah.
So anyway, I've got kind of gone through my own journey with following a lower carb diet and following a keto lifestyle, and also kind of coming into it and coming out of it.
Yeah.
And so I really kind of believe in this concept of metabolic flexibility, and like especially in our modern world, there's a lot of people who are very metabolically inflexible, and they're not
Absolutely.
able to kind of use both fuel sources efficiently when kind of they're warranted. So I guess what's kind of your take on maybe this concept of metabolic flexibility in terms of, I know it's kind of going off topic from the pre-workout, and we can talk about post-workout later, but I
Sure.
kind of want to chat about like if you do have someone who is listening and they do follow more of a lower carb diet, and they do want to optimize maybe their performance, pre and post workout, or just in general, do you have like any experience with kind of a lower carb approach to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's really cool that you kind of dove into the metabolic flexibility. I feel like that was a topic that was a little bit more popular maybe 5 years ago, and it's like not as popular right
Mm-hmm.
now, but I think it absolutely should be. So something, this is funny too, because even though I'm in the evidence-based space, I love what some of the quote unquote bros have practiced for so many years in the bodybuilding world. And a lot of evidence-based people are like, there's no science to support that, and it's not really true. It's just like people cherry pick data.
Mm-hmm.
So something I do with a lot of my clients is I actually tell them that one meal per day needs to be high in fat, high in protein, and you're just having fibrous vegetables as your quote unquote carbohydrate source. So I typically like having some sort of meal. It's usually furthest away from your workout window, um, where it's kind of keto-esque. Again, that's not going to shift someone into ketogenesis by any means, but I think it gives their body a little bit of a break from releasing so much insulin every single meal. And it can help with insulin sensitivity to a slight degree. And I think these things play a larger role, not in a 1 day period or in a 1 week period, but I think over the course of 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. I really think it benefits their overall health. It can potentially minimize like systemic inflammation and stuff like that. So yeah, I have some experience with that. Again, personally, I do have one meal per day where it's very keto looking, where it's high fat, pretty high protein, and then fibrous veg. But and then I have clients too, like during a contest prep, we do get really low carb, just because when you're trying to get like unhealthy lean for bodybuilding
Mm-hmm.
competitions, you kind of required to start digging super deep. So at that point, let's say someone has 5 meals per day. A lot of times, 3 of those meals kind of look more keto-esque. And then the only meals that look non-keto are pre and post at that phase of a contest prep. So I have utilized approaches like, I think it's a bit too extreme for people that are just trying to like optimize health and body composition for like lifestyle purposes, but it does get there when it comes to competitive athletes trying to reach like very lean levels of body composition.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And I think, and the way that I kind of look at, utilizing carbohydrates in the, most optimal way is kind of on this spectrum. Like the more, you know, overweight you are, the more obese you are, the more sedentary you are, probably the lower amount of carbs you need versus the
Yes.
more active you are, the leaner you are, the more carbs you probably need. So it's like, going through that spectrum.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but then in terms of like, okay, so now we're talking about kind of going back to the pre and post workout nutrition. So, post workout nutrition, now kind of we're talking about, putting carbs mostly around your pre and post workout nutrition. What are the
Yeah.
benefits of having like a solid post workout meal in terms of like what, how you would set that up for kind of optimization, I guess you could say?
Sure. So generally speaking, I do actually suggest like low glycemic carbohydrates pre-workout. And even if you're not doing 2-a-days or, you don't have another training bout like 8 hours later, I still recommend high glycemic carbs post-workout with your protein source, because it has been shown that high GI carbs plus protein can potentially increase muscle protein synthesis to a slightly higher degree compared to low GI carbs. And you're just going to resynthesize your muscle glycogen, which is like your gas tank in the muscle cell, your stored carbohydrates a bit better with the high glycemic carbohydrate source. So it can't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So typically speaking, there's two ways to approach it. You can kind of have like a post-workout meal that's also like a snack where it's super fast digesting stuff. So right before we hopped on the call, I was having a protein shake right here with a Rice Krispie treat and a banana. So this was like my high glycemic carb. I
Mm-hmm.
got a little bit of fructose from the banana, still utilizing multiple transportable carbs, and then I got a whey protein isolate. So um, essentially that's like the fastest digesting protein you can get with the most amount of leucine, and it's going to maximize MPS. And then you're getting carbohydrates that are going to digest really quick and kind of replenish your muscle glycogen really quick. So it's just optimizing the recovery response so you're actually ready for your next training session sooner than later, whether that's tomorrow or in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
If you are trying to kind of cross all your T's and dot all your I's, it's the best approach to take. It's not super like necessary or mandatory, but I think there are advantages to doing that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, so we're kind of talking about, optimizing pre, post workout nutrition, all of that. Let's switch gears a little bit to kind of talking about actually training. And you talked a little bit about like effective reps and actually going to the gym and going into the gym with a plan,
Yeah.
and actually like executing and tracking things and understanding like, okay, I'm not just going from machine to machine, like doing, things that feel hard, but I'm actually like tracking exactly what I'm doing. I have a structure and a system and a plan behind this,
Yeah.
because all the talk about pre and post workout nutrition, yeah, that's awesome and it's great to
Yeah.
optimize, but like if you're not
Yeah.
effectively training, if you're someone listening to this, you're not like putting in effective reps like you talked about and have like a structured plan, then pretty much all this, like it matters, but not to obviously the optimization potential. So could you talk a little bit about, maybe we can just talk a little bit more about like the why it's necessary to go into the gym with a plan and like kind of how you would structure, a client coming to you who has maybe just never, maybe they're doing CrossFit or Orange Theory or whatever, and they're never following
Sure.
like a structured training program. How do you kind
Sure.
of go about that?
Yeah, for sure. So those are great points that you're making. And something I want to say is like, your nutrition is really important if your only goal is fat loss. You can lose a ton of body fat and preserve a lot of lean body mass with nutrition alone. But you will build 0 pounds of lean body mass if you are not resistance training or doing some sort of training that's actually inducing an adaptation to occur. So, you can eat 300 grams of protein and be in a surplus and still build 0 muscle if you're not training. So training is definitely like the driving force of recomposition and just building muscle as a whole. So yeah, something that I actually mentioned on another podcast that I never really thought of, but it kind of highlights why training is so important. It's like, imagine you were a runner and you're trying to improve your 1 mile run, or you're not even a runner, you're a Gen Pop person and you're just starting to get into running. And you're like, yeah, I did 1 mile today. Like, you would time what you did your 1 mile jogging, like the first time you ever did it. So let's say it was like an 11-mile jog or whatever. And you're like, all right, next time I want it to be like 10 minutes and 30 seconds. And then eventually 10 minutes. Like, people know that like when they exercise, you're supposed to objectively quantify like what you did. And like, you want to use that to get better. So you're not just going to jog a mile every day just for the purpose of sweating. Like, people always know like what their time is, right? But when they go into the gym, like, they'll just say like, yeah, I did full body today, and they did 6 different exercises. They didn't track any of the weights and reps they did. And then they'll do a totally different workout the next time they hit the gym. So they have no objective numbers in regards to like what they have previously done and what they can improve upon. And they're not tracking progress at all. So I feel like it's the same thing as running without tracking your mile run, right? So the first important thing to do is create any sort of split. You know, it can be a 3-day split, 4-day split, 5-day split, doesn't really matter, but create some sort of program that you're going to stick to and adhere to. And you're actually going to track, you know, I'm doing this exercise with this much load for this much reps, and you're trying to progressively overload over time. So either increase reps and or increase weight. That's super important. I see so many people in commercial gyms that do exercise, you know, 3 to 5 times per week, but they're really just going through the motions. So another problem is, let's just say someone's doing a lat pull down machine for 3 sets of, you know, 10 to 12 reps. That 10th, 11th, and 12th rep look exactly the same as their first, second, and third, because they're so far away from failure that unfortunately it's like you're just going through the motions and you're not providing yourself with a stimulus that's intense enough to force an adaptation. Like, you need to give your body a reason, you need to give your muscle a reason to actually induce a greater level of muscle protein synthesis and say like, all right, I need to recover from that stimulus so I can handle it better the next time. And if you're not training hard enough, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I agree. And would you say, so I know for like my program, like when I program for clients, we look at like RIR or RPE, which if listeners don't know, RIR is like reps in reserve. So basically how many reps do you have left in the tank as you're performing a specific exercise, and kind of being within that. Those effective reps would be, you know, staying within that 2 to 3 RIR or, you know, lower and higher, or not higher, but lower than that. Is that like, how do you go about tracking that with, because, and this is a kind of side note, a lot of people get a little discouraged when they're tracking because they're like, they have to go off percentages and they get really confused with like, what's this percentage of my 1 rep max? Like, I don't even know what that means. And so I keep it super simple. I'm just curious, like how you go about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think generally speaking, if you're doing anything with more than 3 repetitions in reserve, I would say you're kind of wasting your time for the most part. So like 3 RIR is basically the lowest intensity I would train people at. And then I don't, depends on the client, but I don't always use RIR. So a lot of times I'm just like, hey, you need to be, you know, at a 8 to 10 RPE or between a 0 to 3 RIR. And you need to track your loads. And then each microcycle, you're trying to beat what you previously did. So as long as they have those numbers in front of them, like, so many people are truly beginners or intermediates. Like, not many people have elite levels of strength, and they really do have tremendous amount of potential, and they have so much room for improvement that they can make pretty good progress like week after week, or definitely mesocycle after mesocycle. Like, if you follow a strict program for 4 weeks, I guarantee what you're doing on week 4 was much better than what you were doing on week 1. So to give you like a really basic, I guess, progression scheme, if that would help, let's just say an exercise, I program something in for 6 to 10 reps. All right. Let's just call it incline dumbbell press, just for the purpose of an example. What I typically do is have them do as many warm-up sets as needed before their first working set. So their first warm-up set might be 10 reps at a very low load, like 30% of their 1RM. Like, it's effortless. Like, they did 10 reps, but they could have easily done like 20 or 25.
Mm-hmm.
Then they do another set at 5 repetitions, like they increase weight and go to 5 repetitions. Then they do one last acclimation set for just 3 repetitions, just to feel the weight and go through the motion. And then they're doing their top set. So their top set is going to be one really hard set with the goal of hitting that lower end of the range. So if it was 6 to 10, their first true working set is going to be their heaviest set with the goal of 6 reps. So let's just say someone did 70 pounds on the incline dumbbell bench press for 6 reps. And like that 6 rep was a grinder, they probably couldn't have gotten 7. They rest 2 to 3 minutes and they decrease the weight, and then they aim towards that higher end of the rep goal. So maybe they grab the 55s on their second and third set, and then they try to get between maybe 8 and 10. So rather than going, the 6 reps, they do 2 back off sets. So that's generally how I program. I keep it really simple. You do like one really hard set at a low rep range, and then you back off the weight a little bit and you do a couple more reps with lighter load. They're both really intense sets, and then you're done. My warm-up sets are really conservative. Something I used to do in the past was actually like burn myself out on my warm-up sets, where I was burning through literally like muscle glycogen, phosphocreatine stores, and I was actually decreasing my ability to perform on my hard sets, the ones that actually like make the difference and induce the adaptations that we're looking for. So that's something I've changed over the years, and I've really enjoyed it. My clients are loving it. So sorry to ramble. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but
Talk
that's
all you want.
that's how I kind of approach. That's like one way to periodize progression. And I like that on compounds. Maybe towards the end of a workout on isolations, it might be simpler where you keep the same exact weight for 2 to 3 sets and you just kind of train at a high RPE, so that can be like, let's say you're doing a pec deck fly or leg extensions. Maybe the rep goal is 12 to 15. You select a load where that's appropriate for that rep range, and you're pretty close to failure on those sets, and you just keep the load the same and you do a couple sets and you're done. So as long as you're logging it, you're not going to want to go in there and say like, I did this last week, let me do less weight or match the weight. Like, you're going to want to beat it. Like, that's really good intrinsic motivation for, everybody. Like, everyone wants to get better somehow. So as long as you can quantify it, it's a great tool for everyone.
Yeah, I love that. And that's kind of like the light switch that occurred for me. So I did throughout grad school, I was doing a lot of CrossFit just to, like, in grad school, being an athletic trainer, like, no time at all. So I was like, all right, I just need something fast, fun, like competitive, whatever. So I got into CrossFit a lot. And then in undergrad, I did triathlons. So I needed something new. And then when I graduated from grad school, I continued with CrossFit. But I kind of went through, like you talked about, like I went through my own kind of recomposition and got more into like bodybuilding training, things like that. And at first I was like, this is so boring. Like, I don't want to just go to a Globo gym and just like lift weights. Like like, this is just, it's so different than CrossFit. But when I actually invested in my own coach who started programming for me, so I didn't have to think about programming for myself, that was one thing. The second thing was, like you said, actually tracking things and competing with yourself on a daily and a weekly basis. And just like seeing that on paper it was like such a mind switch where I'm like, okay, like, yes, this might not be, I'm not like in CrossFit doing a WOD competing against other people in the class, but I'm literally competing against myself every single week and trying to get better. And the only way you can know that is if you have objective metrics to track that. So
absolutely,
completely agree.
That's very cool.
We still have some time?
Yeah, we got some time. Absolutely.
Okay. So there are 2 more subjects that I kind of want to just touch on. Kind of going back to the body recomposition and that side of things. So I had Dr. Bill Campbell on I guess it's been like a few months now. I know you're familiar with him, right?
Yeah, yeah. He's a co-author on the paper I just published, so we're good friends.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we were obviously, we talked all about like diet breaks and refeeds and all that stuff.
yeah.
What's like your typical, like, do you implement diet breaks and refeeds with your clients? How do you, I know it's kind of, obviously individual and depends on the person, but what
Yeah.
would your kind of general recommendations be for someone who's, going through a body recomposition or fat loss phase or whatever it may be, and
Sure.
implementing refeeds and diet breaks and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I utilize refeeds. I utilize refeeds and diet breaks for every single client. It just depends how frequently, and for how long, and it kind of looks a little bit different for everyone, but they're great tools in your toolbox. So, I guess I'll start with refeeds. Refeeds can be used, in my opinion, way more frequently than diet breaks. And I guess I should quickly define like the differences between the two. I would say a refeed is a significant increase in carbohydrate, for at least one day and probably no more than 3 days, like consecutively back to back. I generally do refeeds for 2 consecutive days, just generally speaking. It could be one, it could be two, it could be three. I would say two is where I normally put them at. And then I would say diet breaks are where you're eating at caloric maintenance by increasing your carbohydrates primarily and maybe increasing your fats a bit, for at least 5 days, and it could be as long as like 3 weeks longer or maybe longer than that in terms of a diet break. So, I would say that's how I would define it. And then refeeds are used pretty regularly. So, let's just say someone is in a fat loss focus phase where they are in a deficit. Their 7-day average is decreasing every week. I might do something where Monday through Friday, when they are, if they have like a normal corporate job or something and they're at work Monday through Friday, I might put them in a calorie deficit for all 5 of those days, because it's for multiple reasons. They're forced to be very structured because it's like, all right, I have to wake up at 7, I have to eat my meal at 8, and then I have to be at work by 9. So like they're already like forced to have some sort of schedule and routine.
Mhm.
So I might put them in deficit then because adherence is likely to be greater. And then on Saturday, Sunday, I might give them refeeds on both days every single week. And that can be like a way for them to have a little bit more flexibility on the weekend, and also an opportunity for them to refill some of that muscle glycogen, improve performance. Because if someone's in a deficit for 5 consecutive days, some of that fatigue might accumulate, come Friday, Saturday. So it gives you like a little opportunity to recharge the battery a bit, and improve performance and overall mood and stick with adherence. So
Mhm.
refeeds can be used like that. It doesn't have to be used weekly though. If someone's trying to be more aggressive with a fat loss phase and adherence isn't an issue and they're like totally laser focused and locked in, you can go much longer periods of time before going with a refeed. Um, so
And do
that's my refeed stuff.
Yeah. And do you, because sometimes people get confused on this a little bit, especially in a fat loss phase. When we're talking about incorporating refeeds, obviously a lot of people tend to think, oh, I can just, go out and eat whatever I want on the weekends. Obviously we know that that's probably not the best, the best choice,
Yeah.
but in terms of when we're looking at like your overall weekly intake, the kind of deciphering, weekly caloric intake is obviously definitely more important to look at than daily
Yep.
caloric intake, and utilizing calorie cycling, refeeds, and all of that. So do you keep? Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. We're good.
When you're implementing your refeeds for someone who's in a fat loss phase, like do you account for that within the total caloric deficit for the week, or how do you do that? How do you go about
Yeah.
that? Okay.
Sure. The whole 3,500 calorie rule is something I'm not a big fan of, like in this current phase of my coaching. I think I used to pay a little bit more attention to the numbers, when I was younger and when I was first starting off, which was probably great. And it was a great learning tool for me. But, something I realized is like, I don't want to get off on a large
No, you're good.
side
Can you
tangent.
just say what the 3,500, just in case someone's like, what are you talking about?
Sure. So there's this, there's a pretty good understanding that losing 1 pound of body fat, is 3,500 calories worth of adipose tissue. Um, so a lot of people, if you utilize a calculator like the Mifflin St. Jean, any sort of like basal metabolic rate calculator, and you're trying to figure out like where your calories should be for weight loss, if people want to lose 1 pound of fat per week, what typically, these calculators do is they put you in a 500 calorie deficit on a daily basis. Therefore, after 7 days of being in a 500 calorie deficit, you have been in a 3,500 calorie deficit for the entire week, and therefore you should lose 1 pound of fat. The reason I say I am not really a big fan of that rule anymore, and why I don't really utilize it, is because if I have a 190-pound male and I calculate what their current theoretical maintenance would be, I probably don't even put them in 500 calorie deficits right off the bat. And I often would see like weight loss that is 1 pound or more per week. And then if I had a female that like their theoretical maintenance is like 1,900 calories or 2,100 calories, I never put them in a quote unquote 500 calorie deficit right off the bat. So I think that rule is just a little bit dangerous, so to speak. But nonetheless, I forgot it. You're asking exactly like how much are your refeeds and why? Is that kind of correct? Okay. So let's say someone's in a deficit and they are losing weight on their 7-day averages throughout the week. I increase their calories when they refeed primarily from carbohydrate to what I would consider or what I would calculate their theoretical maintenance. So if it's a female and they're dieting on like 1,750 calories, I might bump them up to like 2,100 calories on their refeed days. So it basically puts them at quote unquote theoretical maintenance. Typically not really like a surplus. It's not like I'm really overfeeding them. I'm just trying to get them back to baseline where their body can rest. They have enough fuel coming in where they're not in a deficit anymore, but they don't have to be in a surplus by any means. So that's kind of my thought process with the refeeds.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And then in terms, and we don't have to dive too deep into this, but in terms of diet breaks, like what would you say in terms of like the benefits of diet breaks? Do you feel like they're more psychological versus physiological, or do you feel like there's kind of both positives? I'm losing my train of thought.
No, you're
you know
good.
what I mean.
I got you.
Okay.
I'll pick up the ball. So it's like, I would say it's definitely both psychological and physiological. Diet breaks are important to use when you've lost a significant amount of weight and you've been dieting for a significant amount of time. I basically would never utilize a diet break unless someone's been losing weight week after week for a minimum of 6 weeks straight, and it kind of depends on like, what's their goal, what's their timeline. Best case scenario, I'm sure you kind of love this as a coach, where if you have a client and they are in this position where they're going to trust you 100% and they're just like, listen, you tell me what to do and I'm going to listen. So, if a client wants to lose 25 pounds of fat, there's a big difference if the client tells you like, yeah, I don't care if this takes me like 6 to 8 months versus like, hey, I want to do this in 16 weeks. Like there's a big difference there. So if someone wants to do this in the best way possible and they have the patience, it's nice to kind of, lose weight for maybe 6 weeks straight, 8 weeks straight, and then diet break for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, kind of rebuild their metabolic capacity a bit, get them to perform like really, really good in the gym and kind of teach them what it would be like to maintain this new body weight. And then say like, okay, you're feeling good. The battery's recharged. Let's get back into this fat loss phase. So it really depends on how patient the client can be. But again, if someone's been dieting for, I would say like 12 consecutive weeks and they haven't done a diet break yet, that's definitely a good time to diet break before they really stall out, and then you start working against yourself and you make the fat loss phase more difficult for you as a coach, and you make it way more difficult on the client.
Yeah, I agree. It's like you're kind of getting your oil changed, right? It's like you got to do it before the car taps out, right?
Yeah, that's
so
an
yeah,
awesome
I definitely,
analogy.
and I love what you said about planning out and realizing this kind of nutritional periodization side of things. And I talk about that a lot on this podcast because I'm a huge fan of, having a longer term plan and like looking at over the long term and planning out these things strategically, but then also coming back to the person, like, and I'm sure you do this with your clients, like tracking biofeedback, looking at their sleep, looking at, how they're performing, their recovery. And if all these things are like, they're tapping out on all these things, they're in a fat loss phase, they're not sleeping, they're not recovering, like, then we know, okay, we probably hit that point in time where we do need to take a diet break, and we're doing it strategically, right? It's not just like, oh, like you're going to go out and eat whatever you want for a week. Like that's not really optimal.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So,
that's great. You mentioned nutritional periodization. I think, you kind of spoke about before, a lot of your audience might be a little bit keto based, or they might really like the concept of metabolic flexibility. On that topic and on like nutritional periodization, tying them in together, a lot of my clients, I give them, training day macronutrients and non-training day macronutrients. So their non-training day numbers are typically slightly higher fat, slightly lower carb. And then their training days are generally higher in calories altogether, and it can be slightly lower fat and slightly higher carbs. So if you are someone that kind of likes utilizing higher fat, lower carb diets, you can absolutely do that. Maybe just utilize carbs around your workout. And then on your non-training days, maybe you do go like pretty darn low carb, if that's your preference. So you have so many options.
yeah, for sure. And that's typically how I have, been structuring my nutrition over the past kind of year, 2 years, as I've been incorporating more carbohydrates recently. Like I actually just started my first real building phase, I guess you could say, 4 months
Nice.
ago. I ended a cut, did a reverse. And then I've actually gained 8 pounds in the last 4 months, which is,
That's
scary, but
epic. That's
also,
epic.
exciting at the same time. Cause I know that, lifts are going up at the gym and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
anyway, so like recently I've been doing a little bit more of a higher carb intake also because a lot of my listeners know this, but I'm a huge fan of squash.
Okay.
So it's squash season right now, and I
Nice.
love squash. If I could eat two things for the rest of my life, it would be steak and squash. So kind of also kind of to that point in terms of, the carbohydrates and the protein and the fats that you're consuming, like a lot of people think, a calorie is a calorie, but we know that, is not really the case in how your body processes those calories. And I guess kind of like my last question for you is when you're structuring nutrition for like your clients, are you focusing more on, making sure that they are getting a good amount of whole foods into their diet, and then having kind of that flexibility side of things, and really, focusing on dialing those things in before, we call it like getting the low hanging fruit first before you worry about like all the other stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's like staple stuff for
Yeah.
me. Like, super important, super important. It varies per client based on what they can sustain and adhere to. So if I have a client that literally loves eating nothing but whole nutrient dense foods, their diet literally might be like 95% whole and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
5% processed. Whereas some people might be closer to the 80-20 rule. And yeah, it's very individual, but the majority of your diet needs to be whole nutrient dense foods,
Yeah.
100%. So yeah, just general rules of thumb, like basically all my clients tell them, okay, you need to have 3 servings of veggies every single day and 2 servings of fruit every single day. So many people come to me with digestive issues, and literally just by like eating fruits and vegetables in their diet, they're like, oh, I feel so much better. It's
Mm-hmm.
like not rocket science stuff. It's like the most basic stuff. And, like they'd go to a GI doctor for months, or they'll be on like a prescription medication or whatever. It's like your diet is horrible. Like, of course you have GI symptoms. And
Yeah.
it's like, all right, let's eliminate X, Y, and Z. And then let's incorporate, A, B, and C. And
Yeah.
I guarantee you things will move in a positive direction. So sometimes it's really simple stuff that makes like the most significant impact.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And that's something that I focus on a lot too with like my clients, is like a lot of them, come to me, and I use the phrase a lot, like majoring in the minor. And like exactly what you said, like if we can just fix like these things that are so basic, like it can make such a big difference in everything else that you're doing. So I completely agree with that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, I have two last questions for you that are more like personal on the spot
Sure.
questions. Don't worry, they're not too hard.
Okay.
So the first question is there anything that you've changed your mind about in the last year, and why? And it doesn't have to be nutrition, fitness. It can be anything at all. Take time.
Yeah. I mean, I'll share like one training thing. So when it comes to training, I used to set up my training in a fashion, like this might be a little, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how, like what your audience focuses on, but
It doesn't,
I'll
whatever.
share it anyway. Sure. So like oftentimes I would set up my, my bodybuilding training routines where I would do some sort of like warm up and primer in the beginning. I would do my heavy compounds at the end. I would do some isolation works after the compounds. And then I would finish with like metabolic work at the end. So I would have, heavy mechanical tension stuff in the beginning and finish with like metabolic stress work. So more high rep pump work towards the end of the session. And now I've changed my training where I have different days where I kind of separate that stimulus. So right now I have days that are more mechanical tension based, a little bit more strength based, like lower rep ranges, far from powerlifting strength wise, but just like on the lower end of the rep ranges for hypertrophy work. And then I have totally different training sessions where I utilize things like pre-exhaustion to start, compounds in the middle, and then I do like metabolic work at the end. So it's more of a metabolic session as a whole. So like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I kind of have separated my training stimuluses from session to session rather than like bunching them in one session.
Gotcha.
That's something that's changed over the year. So yeah.
Cool. And then kind of another question related, I guess. So what, is there anything that you've personally been implementing like for yourself, in the last month or so, whether it's nutrition wise, mindset wise, lifestyle, anything at all that you've found to have like a difference in like your day-to-day daily practices, anything like that?
Nothing really comes off the top of my head.
Putting you on the spot, I
Things
know.
are like something I will say is I think everyone kind of goes through ups and downs, or like motivation's high, motivation's low. Right now things are going really great. So trying to like ride that wave and maximize it, but also know that something will pop up just like in life, and it's important to stay on course. So, just trying to ride this wave where things are feeling really good. My mindset's in a good spot, but also be prepared that like when shit hits the fan, hey, let's stay on course and like, let's let these habits kind of continue to carry you through, even if you're not really feeling it mentally. So I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding where they might see like a competitive athlete or someone that has achieved a certain level of success with their body composition goals. And they might just be like, oh, well, that person really loves it and like they really enjoy it. And like, I don't enjoy it. And that's not always necessarily true. I absolutely love training. It's a huge stress reliever, and it's like definitely therapeutic in so many ways. But there are so many times where I don't want to go to the gym and I just force myself to go. So I think it's important for everyone to hear that, because we're all human, and we basically share the same feelings, whether we talk about it or not.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I completely agree. Like, motivation ebbs and flows day to day, week to week, month to month. And having, I think for me specifically, like realizing that discipline is definitely more important than motivation. And also having someone who holds me accountable is really important. So as a coach yourself, I know you probably agree with this, just having that accountability factor when it comes, even if you're not looking to like go through a fat loss phase or anything like that, but even just in training, like right now, knowing that I have someone looking at my training log on a weekly basis just helps me know that I am, accountable to someone over myself. And it's like, yeah, so I agree.
No, I totally hear that.
Awesome. Do you want to tell our listeners like maybe where they can, oh, first of all, do you want to share anything like recently anything that you have on the horizon coming up for you or anything
Sure.
like research wise or
Yeah,
anything?
sure. Research wise, there's a lot of cool things in the works, but data collection has kind of been temporarily put on pause because of COVID, so that's annoying. But yeah, really cool stuff coming out, especially related to like training volume. So that's coming soon. And then we already finished data collection a while back. We're in the writing process right now for 2 papers. One's on like repetition tempo. So how fast or slow should your eccentric be and why? And then the other one is on something called interset stretching. So stretching the muscle in between the sets. So we have 2 research studies coming out on that. And then I'm working on my first meta-analysis, which is quite intimidating, but also super exciting at the same time. And that's actually going to be on body recomposition. So really pumped about it. Yeah. And then in regards to some personal stuff and business stuff, I plan on competing in 2021. That's what I'm working towards right now. I haven't competed since 2017. And because I started in 2011, it will be like a decade of competing. So I think that's pretty cool. And then I plan on releasing a very comprehensive training program probably in January. So I currently have 3 training programs that I've created years back, and I've been selling for a while, and people love it. They've gotten great results, but like you said, our philosophies kind of always change a little bit over time, and a lot of people want to do like what you're currently doing, not like what you've previously done. So coming out with a new training program in January that I'm really pumped about. So you can stay tuned for that. And that's basically like what's on the horizon for the most part.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So can you tell listeners where they can find you, like your website, social media, all that stuff?
Yeah, sure. So again, Rachel, thank you so much for having me on, because I do feel like our audiences are a little bit different, and I love to reach as many people as possible, because at the end of the day, I like just sharing my knowledge and experience and hoping it benefits people. So thank you again.
Sure.
In regards to like where you can find more information, I'm most active on social media. So my social media handle is just my full name. It's at Christopher.Barakat on Instagram. And then my educational platform is schoolofgainz.com, and Gainz is spelled with a Z. On there we have, I definitely want to plug this, because there is a nutrition guide that's called The Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition. I co-authored this with Jeff Nippard, and like all the things we spoke about today with like pre-workout nutrition, post-workout nutrition, and setting up your macronutrients, you can learn all of that yourself with like so much detail in regards to individual context, and you can literally set up your entire diet with that book alone. So definitely check that out. And then I have a full team of coaches. I have an RD on staff. So if there's anyone with like autoimmune diseases, or, going through some difficult times and they need some help, you can reach out to me and my team, and we would love to help if possible.
Awesome. So I will link the website in the description. Then on social media, what's your handle?
Just my full name. So it's at Christopher .Barakat.
Okay.
And yeah.
Cool. So I'll link all that in the show notes. And yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time and coming on. And I'm excited to get this out to the listeners, and I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Cool. Bye.